Greetings, productive programmers. So now we are going to talk about change sets, which are a really powerful concept that come with Ecto and allow us to validate our data or our change sets. And they're going to be really helpful for you understanding how forms work later on with Phoenix and understanding what a change set actually is, so you can have greater control over your code when you are persisting data to your database. So let's take a look at this concept. So in order to demonstrate this concept, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop us into a shell. So you can do this to work with your data. You can type IEX-S, capital S, and then do mix, and just make sure you're inside of your customer project. And this will drop you into a shell, and you will be able to then use all the code that's actually created with your schema. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to alias the customer.customer. So because I named our project customer, I probably should have maybe named this like demo, but I named it customer as well as I named our schema also customer. I'm going to have to just do customer.customer, and that's going to alias it so that the second part here can just be called directly in the shell. So now I can just do customer, and then it will refer to this customer schema that we've defined in our project. So this customer schema is what we're going to work with, and we're going to take a look at how change sets are utilized. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do change set, and I'm going to set it to be the customer.changeset, and I am going to set it up so that we utilize a customer struct. And then I'm going to pass in the change set here, but we don't need to define any, we don't need to set any of the values yet. So I'm just going to have an empty map here. That's basically, we're not passing in any values to our customer yet. And I'm going to do that on purpose just to show you that it's going to complain, because it's going to say that our customer change set has a whole bunch of errors now. So just to break this code down again, because I've aliased this customer here, that's what this customer is now set to our schema, and we can use it here in the shell. And so I'm doing customer.changeset, which is referring to this change set in our customer schema. So that's what we're interacting with now. And that change set is going to take a customer struct, which is basically our customer schema, and it's going to then take a map of all of the values that we want to pass to as a change set to the customer schema. But we passed an empty map just to showcase that if we don't send the data we need, we get a whole bunch of errors, and they are all listed here for us. And we've set this so that the change set is now stored in a separate variable. So if I type change set, we can interact with this data. You can see it's an Ecto change set. So to interact with this data, we can do some interesting things. The first thing we can do is we saw that there are errors here. So let's just go ahead and let's call change set. I'm just going to clear this out really quickly and call change set.errors. And you'll see that it will print all of the errors. So it says that the first name, last name, email, and age cannot be blank. Well, why does it say that? Well, the reason that it says that those values can't be blank is because in our change set that we've defined in our customer schema, we've said that the validate required is set for the list of all of the values. So first name, last name, email, and age. So that's why when we do change set errors, it's going to say that these cannot be blank. So let's just go ahead, and it says that the validation is required. Let's just go ahead and let's just delete one of these. So let's say, for example, that we don't need to have the age. So let's just remove that one and let's save it. And then what we can do is right here from the command line, without having to stop and restart it, we can just type recompile, and that'll recompile our code here. And now what I'll do is I'll rerun this change set command, so that way we repass in a fresh start here with customer change set. And now it will say that there's only 3 errors, and you can see age is omitted. So change set.errors, and it will showcase that we only have these 3 errors. So you can see when I run change set.errors, all it's doing is it's just grabbing this section essentially. So that's the nice thing about change set is you can refer to all of these by just doing dot and then the name of any of the keys that are inside of your change set. So here you can see now age is no longer required because we removed it from validate required. And that's all you have to do to choose which fields are going to need to be validated. So that was easy. And the other thing that we can do is, well, how do we determine if this is valid? Well, actually there's a command for us and you can see it's here valid. And we already know it's false, but when you're checking your change sets, it's very common to just do change set valid ? And it will tell you true or false if the data is valid. So right now the data is technically not valid, and that's because we have not passed in any of this information. So let's go ahead and let's run this command again, but let's pass in the first name, last name, and email and see if we can get our change set to be valid. So let me just clear this out. So I'm just going to write this data out. So I'll say first name, and I'll put John, and then I will put last name, and I'll put Doe, and then I'll go ahead and I'll define an email, and that email can be something like johndoe@gmail.com. And then after I define that, it's going to say, okay, so I made a typo here. So let me just quickly fix that. So you can see that's the nice thing about this. It did catch the error. So it says that last name can't be blank. And so the value is, it's still technically not valid. And that was because of a typo that I made. So let me just go ahead and put an underscore. So let me just go ahead and put an underscore here in last name. And now our data is valid. So changeset.valid is true. And make sure you use the question mark. And so changeset.valid is true. And then changeset.errors is going to show that there are no more errors anymore because everything is valid. Another cool command that you can run is changeset.changes, and it'll show you all of the changes that we've made to our entry. So you can see the email, the first name, and the last name that were passed in that change set. So change sets kind of pack up and handle all of the validation for us out of the box. And in this case, we're just doing some really simple validation to make sure that these fields are defined in our change set. And again, the way that we define our change sets, we need to pass in the struct of our change set, as well as a map of all the values that we are trying to change. And then what we can do when we're using our command is we can just pass in the params directly in as an argument to our change set parameter. So you can see here, if you look at our schema, our customer schema, this change set takes a customer and it takes attributes. And so essentially that's what we're doing here is we're passing in the customer struct and then we're passing in the params. And so the customer struct here, that may represent an existing customer in your database, but for now we're just setting up a empty customer because we're creating a new one from scratch essentially, and we haven't persisted this data to the database yet. We're just exploring how change sets work so far, but you're going to see how all of this makes more sense when we actually persist this data to the database. So for now, we're just creating an empty struct for a customer, and we are just testing out the change set to make sure that we have a valid change set. But we are not yet persisted any of this to the database, so I just want to emphasize that. In the next lesson, I'm going to use the change sets to actually persist the data to the database, but it's important that you understand how validation works in depth, which is why I'm breaking down all of these change set features. And so before we do persist the data to the database, I just want to show you one more important feature, which is to elaborate on the validation, because right now we are just making sure that these fields exist, but I want to show you what you can do and the power of Phoenix and Ecto. So another feature that you have for validating your change sets is you can use other validations. So instead of just validate required, we can also validate things like the length. And so to demonstrate this, I'm just going to use first name, and I'm going to set it so that the minimum number of characters that a first name could be is, let's say, 2 characters. And that should do. And then I'll just fix this typo here. And so this validate length is going to make sure that our first name can be at least 2 characters. We can also define a max for it for the first name. So we'll say the max is And this won't be really very realistic, but it's just for demonstration purposes. Let's just set it to 5. And let's save that. And then in our terminal, we can go ahead and we can recompile this. And so now what we can do is we can run a new change set. So in this change set, we have a first name set to John. So if we run that, it's going to say that it's valid, and that's true because there is no errors because John is 4 characters between 2 and 5. Let's say that the name is something unrealistic, such as A. And we can see that there's an error. Our change set dot errors. So our change set errors show that first name should be at least 2 characters. We can also access our change set errors by calling them as an atom. So in this case, atom first name, and that will be the key inside of our errors. So we can actually grab the first name list and we can get all of the reasons why it's not valid right from the change set errors by using first name as a key. So that's really useful, especially if we have multiple errors. We can grab which key we want to look at in particular. So just wanted to show you that. So if you wanted to grab the first name error, then you have that ability as well. So you can grab change set errors by their key using this syntax. And we'll generate one more error just by making a really long name, and we'll pass that in. And then we'll see here that now our error is that it cannot be more than 5. And so now we know that the kind of error that we had is max. So we were past the max length, we were over the count of 5. And so this is provided to us as well in our change set errors. So if we call change set.valid, we can see that this is false, it is not valid. And then we can see all of the data inside of our change set by just simply dump in the change set information if you want to see how this is all structured here. So we can see all of our changes, our errors, and the status if it's valid or not. And so hopefully you can understand that all these values are going to be very useful. We can also add another validate method such as validate, and we can say format. So we can validate the format of our data. In this case, we could do email. And we could validate just to make sure using, so another thing is that it does support regex. So if you're familiar with regex, you can use regex inside of your validations. And if you're not familiar with it, then it's a good skill to learn, but you can just follow along and copy what I'm doing here. But basically this is going to check our email to make sure that there's an @ symbol in it to validate that it's an email. And so what I'll do is I'll just recompile this code again. So we knew before that John is a valid name, but if we run this now, we can see that there's no errors and everything is valid, it's true. But what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that now our email is going to be missing that @ symbol. So it's not a valid email anymore. And if we run this, we can see that there's an error. The email has valid format error is thrown. This is not a valid email, and thus our change set, is it valid? No, it's not going to be valid. It is false. It is not valid unless we have that @ symbol in our email. And so this is just to demonstrate some of the examples of validation that you have at your disposal with Elixir, which is the programming language that we use in Phoenix. So I just want to show you here on the official form and documentation for Elixir, the ecto.changeset. So this documentation, it's huge. It's really, really big. There's a lot that you can learn about the Ecto change sets, but essentially if you wanted to learn more about the other types of validations there are, this is a great resource to see all the other ways that you can validate your data because it's quite extensive, the functionality that you have at your disposal, and there's a lot to cover. Just want you to be aware of the resource in case you need to do more sophisticated validation for whatever your domain application is. And you would just chain them by piping them one after another to run all of the validations. And there's one last thing that I want to show you with creating our change set. So we can create a valid change set here. I'm just going to show you from this valid change set that we have. Let's go ahead and let's add some erroneous fields. So let's just say something like we passed in key dog and we pass in bark. Well, if we do this, what's going to happen is our change set going to be bad now, or is it going to work? What's going to happen? Well, let's find out. Let's run it, and we can see that our change set is still valid. And if we take a look at our changes, the dog key with bark is not included. So what change sets do is they basically limit the data that you are going to be looking at. So in this case, even if we pass additional data here, our change set is going to filter it down to only the data that we're validating, and it's going to bring that into our change set because Ecto is smart enough to know that the dog keyword is not part of our schema. So it's not going to bother with looking at something that's outside of the scope of our schema. So cast is just a list of columns to be updated. So if for some reason you had a field in here that you didn't want your data to update, you could remove it from your cast here. So that way you wouldn't accidentally update something. In our case, we don't have a good reason not to update all of these. We would want to change the first name, last name, email, and age. But if for some reason you didn't want to, you could remove that field. So that way that data would not be changed when you're persistent data to your database. So just something to be aware of, that you don't have to worry about erroneous data when you're dealing with looking at your Ecto change sets, which gives you the power and flexibility to just focus on using your change sets and not worry about having to clean up all of your data, because the change set will take care of cleaning and parsing out your data for you and doing all the validation steps. Okay, great. So we've covered everything here with our schema, with our validation and our change set. Now I guess it's time for us to actually save this information to the database, because all we've done so far is just kind of play around with validating our data and seeing how we can set it up into a change set, but we haven't used the change set to do what it's supposed to do, which is validate the data and then save it to the database. So let's go ahead and let's do that in the next lesson, because there's a couple pieces I want to cover there, and there's a couple ways that you can interact with your database.